do you surrender yourself to the experience of building community and maintaining it? Hi, I'm Kiana Elkins. I'm a conflict resilience educator and community steward, and I have been helping people like you build community and navigate the conflict that inevitably happens within those spaces. I've been doing this work for nearly a decade and tend to work with people both in their friendships, through their work relationships, and all other types of community dynamics. So today's question comes from a member of my community who wants to stay anonymous, and they have asked how to surrender yourself to the experience of building community and maintaining it. How do you not only build community, but maintain it consistently and nurture it in being your authentic self? Thank you so much for submitting this question. First, I want to just bring attention to the use of the word surrender in here in the first part of the question, mostly because that's a really interesting word choice. And I'm really curious as to why the experience of building community and maintaining it feels like something that you have to surrender to. Not stating that as a good or a bad thing, it's just something that I'm curious about and that I want to invite you to get curious about as well. Now, for the second part of this question, I'm actually going to break it up into two parts because there's the building and maintaining community piece, but also being authentic. So I want to just start off with the being or practicing authenticity piece as our first part. Now, I really do wish that I had the the time and space to like really go into depth around ways that we can practice authenticity and how we're showing up in our relationships. But ultimately, the only way to be authentic in our relationships is to be in a practice of being authentic in our relationships. And that's much easier said than done. Like, I know for myself, I was really taught that who I was authentically, the true version of myself, that part of myself was undesirable, unlovable, that people were really bothered by me. They thought I was rude, all of this stuff, right? And so I feel like I had very justified reasons to actually not be authentic in my relationships and often fell into a pattern of people pleasing, which I know is very common. And if you are someone asking a question around authenticity, I imagine that you may also struggle with people pleasing, or at the very least having people or assuming that people maybe don't like or don't respond well to who you are authentically. So when we're thinking about this practicing authenticity, there's a certain level of self-work that we have to do to come into a better relationship with ourselves so that we can then show up authentically with other people. You know, like I was saying, when I was in my sort of people pleasing patterns, my relationships were often ruined or not able to really be sustained because I was more or less pretending to be someone else in every relationship. And that got really tiring and that's really hard to sustain. And then once the real me started to like surface and creep in and be visible, there were certain people who weren't interested in that part of me that they were now seeing. And that can obviously lead to a lot of grief in, relationships ending. Something else I want to talk about, and this is just something that I've thought about, or a framework that I put together in thinking about my journey of practicing authenticity and building community, which is this sort of triangle here of self love, self trust, and self compassion, and the ways in which they all influence each other, but ultimately support this effort of being authentic. So, establishing self love for yourself, to me, that really means coming to acceptance and love of the qualities about ourselves that we find both really enjoyable and that we like about ourselves, but also the parts of ourselves that we're like, that's less than desirable or not helpful. Um, we tend to have personality traits that we're not particularly fond of, and we like run away from those things. We try to ignore them, we try to deny that they exist, etc. But to a certain extent, we actually have to welcome those pieces of us back in. And when we're able to do that, we are now more in love with who we are, which then means that we're more confident or more comfortable showing that part of ourselves or these parts of ourselves to other people. Next is the self trust piece, which to me, I think about self trust as believing that at any given point in time, I'm going to make the best decision with the information that I have. I don't think of myself as someone who wants to hurt myself or someone who wants to cause more complications or more challenges for myself. Ultimately, I see who I am as someone who's trying to like help me live a good life. And I have to trust that. I have to trust that even if I mess up or if things don't go as I planned, if I try to build community with someone or people and that doesn't work out, that I can always return to self-trust, to sort of find my way back to my initial goals of wanting to be authentic and wanting to build community. Next is the self-compassion piece. And, I talked about the grief that can happen around like losing friendships, as well as sort of these attempts as we're practicing. Like, I really want to emphasize the term or the language of practicing, because that's really what we're doing is we are trying something new. Sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. And sometimes we learn things about ourselves in this process that is really surprising and can, kind of interrupt like our confidence in doing this work. But having that self-compassion will then help us move through all of that frustration, to be more gentle with ourselves and acknowledging like we are trying, right? Or that we are just people fumbling in the world and doing our best. So I really see this sort of triangle, of the self-love, self-trust, and self-compassion as really useful tools to help us then practice authenticity. And I really want to invite you to research or look into, talk to people about how you can then build out those three things as well. Now on to part two of your question, which is the building and maintaining community piece. The best thing I think you can do is read We Should Get Together. This is one of my favorite books as far as specifically it's related to friendships, but I think it's a really useful book around building community generally. We Should Get Together is written for like millennial people, millennial aged people living in cities. And it really acknowledges how hard it can be to make friends in cities. And Kat Bellows, the author, offers both research to back up what she's saying, stories. She's giving you like frameworks to break down all this stuff, which I'll get into a little bit. Um, and then also, she gives you really practical steps that you can take to cultivate friendships, or different ways to think about the challenges that you might have in cultivating friendships. I really highly recommend the book We Should Get Together. And so the rest of the advice that I really have for you around building and maintaining community comes from this book, We Should Get Together. And so, in one of the sections of the book, Kat quotes Dr. Jeffrey Hall from his study, How Many Hours Does It Take to Make a Friend? And in that study, they found that it takes 90 to 200 hours to turn a stranger or acquaintance into a close friend. And this study was specifically done in the context of college students. And so that 90 to 200 hours, like that's for people who are constantly seeing each other all the time. Like they are going to classes together. They have a reason to interact with each other. And so they're then naturally going to like build relationships if they're engaging in that space. When we are outside of school or if you're outside of work, because a similar sort of effect can happen in workplaces, we have to be much more intentional and purposeful in how we're trying to build these relationships and community, because we aren't in close proximity together. We aren't spending built-in time together. So we have to go out of our way to schedule that time, to follow up with people and all of that. In the book as well, Kat has identified what she calls seeds of connection. And so these are proximity, frequency, compatibility, and commitment. And so the proximity piece is, being in physical proximity to people. It's a lot easier to become friends with the person that you sit next to at work every day, than it is to maintain your friendship with someone that you met on an airplane once and they live in France or something like that, right? Then there is the frequency piece, which is again just the consistent action of seeing one another. One of the ways that I have tried to utilize or lean into frequency in my relationships is oftentimes if I meet someone and I'm like, okay, I get really good vibes from you, like I want to be your friend or learn more about you, I'll usually invite them to hang out with me within 1 week of like meeting each other or having a sort of initial conversation that I really enjoyed. And then from that 1 week hangout, I'm texting people after, letting folks know that I enjoyed hanging out with them, or trying to make plans to see them again. But we want to lean into that frequency to build up the 90 to 200 hours sort of thing that it takes to make a friend. Then there's just compatibility generally. And when we're thinking about compatibility, we often assume that other people are similar to us, and the compatibility piece can really throw a relationship off track. That can be something that feels as significant as like a difference in values. So I don't tend to be friends with people who are like really into prisons. You know what I mean? But then it can also be something that's as small as like, I've had a hard time maintaining friends because I don't like to text people. I prefer phone calls. And then some of the people that I want to be friends with, they don't like phone calls. They like to text people. And so then we have to figure out a sort of middle ground, or what ultimately might end up happening is the relationship fizzles out. And then the last seed of commitment that Kat has identified is commitment. And with the commitment piece, she's ultimately just talking about how every relationship needs both people or all parties to be committed to the maintaining of that relationship. So that is one of the things that I think a lot of people find hard in their community building efforts and like maintaining community, is that you might be, or you might feel like you're the only person in the relationship who's like really thinking about the relationship, and you're the one who's reaching out to set up, opportunities to hang out. You're the one that's following up with people, and it can really feel like there's a lot of labor or burden being put on you to actually maintain the relationship. And the other person, for whatever reason, may not be putting in a sort of equal amount of effort, and that can feel, really uncomfortable. And so oftentimes, to sort of get around that, one, I don't want to make assumptions about why someone is not like showing up to the relationship in the same way that I'm trying to, or in the way that I want them to. And instead, I might reach out to someone and just let them know, like, this is the type of relationship that I want with you. What type of relationship do you want with me? And then where there's similarities, like fantastic. Where there's differences, we now can negotiate. And then going from there and saying, okay, so how can we co-create or co-build this together, right? And that usually ends up in really beautiful conversations where now we are talking about those compatibility pieces of like, okay, I'm not going to text you, but like we can do a video call or something like that. Like maybe we're both okay with video call. Now we're bringing people into this community building process with us, and it feels like less of a burden that you're taking on all by yourself. So that's more or less all that I have to say about this question, specifically about building and maintaining community in an authentic way. I hope that you found that information helpful. Again, if this is something that you're really thinking about, I highly, highly, highly recommend you read the book We Should Get Together. And then also, if you want more support, you should definitely go to my website, lovingpractice.com, and subscribe to my newsletter. I think a lot about relationships as sites of liberation and about community building, and specifically about how we build community in a way that we can then navigate the conflict that happens in community or in relationships. And so, you'll want to subscribe to my newsletter so that you can get the insights, tools, tips, etc. that I share. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you found this helpful.